Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the content patch for the 10th of September 2013. My name is TotalBiscuit with today's gaming news and comment. Coming up in the show, we'll be covering the announcements from the Sony Japanese press conference. DICE announces recommended specs for PC version of Battlefield 4, and we'll be taking a look at the upcoming game releases for this week. All this in the OC Remix track of the day is coming your way right about now. Sony made a couple of significant hardware announcements at their recent Sony Computer Entertainment of Japan press conference. This includes a refresh on the PlayStation Vita hardware, as well as the so-called PS Vita TV, which will be a standalone unit. This came alongside the release date for the PlayStation 4 in Japan, which is February the 22nd, 2014, which will also include a complimentary copy of NAC for early PlayStation 4 adopters in Japan. They've also confirmed that the Capcom title Deep Down will in fact be a PlayStation 4 exclusive, as well as detailed a number of different titles that will be coming your way, or more specifically, coming to Japan. None of this stuff is necessarily confirmed for worldwide release when it comes to the games, although they have spoken about the hardware more specifically. So, let's get into it. So, the first thing, PlayStation Vita refresh. What has it got going for it? Well, the first thing is they've changed the OLED screen to an LCD screen, which is a little bit strange considering they were touting the OLED screen as being a feature which brightens the world and actually gives a better display. There's a gigantic article over on PlayStation.com about it. Of course, the actual difference between an OLED screen and an LCD screen with current technology, that kind of remains to be seen, and there's something of a debate going on with it. I have to assume this was done to cut costs when it came down to the actual hardware itself. OLED screens are fairly expensive comparative to LCD. It will also include 1GB of onboard storage. This is not RAM, this is essentially an onboard memory card, so you will not have to have a memory card if all you want to do is save games. Of course, if you want to download or install anything, then chances are you're going to need some bigger storage. They're also talking about it being 20% thinner, 15% lighter, but also having 1 hour more of battery life on average. They've also swapped out the charger cable for a standard micro USB, so instead of that proprietary one that's being used, you can just plug in any old cable and it'll charge that way. One has to assume that would also be the data port on this thing, so that would be a little bit more useful, I suppose, if you're looking to plug it into a PlayStation 3 or a PC in order to transfer data. The refresh will be launched on the 10th of October, so that's in a month's time, in 5 different colors for 199,000 yen, which is around $200. Release dates in other parts of the world have not been announced at this time. One assumes that they will. You generally don't refresh hardware for just one market, although I believe there have been a couple of rare instances in the past where that has occurred. Alright, so for the most part, this is pretty good news. It's hard to say how much of a difference the LCD screen will make in comparison to the OLED. Will it be better? Will it be worse? Will it be about the same? Will it even be noticeable? I don't know. I would have to get my hands on this thing at this point. Everything else is just mere speculation. The onboard storage is fantastic. Thinner and lighter doesn't really make much of a difference to me, honestly. It was a good size as far as I'm concerned. I guess it'll make it easier to slip into your pocket, but hey, I got big pockets, so I don't have a real problem with that. The battery life, no one's going to argue with that, so that's always good. The micro USB, that's kind of whatever, honestly. It doesn't really matter one way or the other. I guess it makes it a little bit more convenient. So, overall, it seems like a good refresh of the hardware. After about a year of it being out, it makes sense to do that. It looks like a cost-cutting measure. Again, that makes sense. They do want to sell this thing a little bit cheaper so they can get it into the hands of people. Considering they already announced a price cut on the older models, this would make sense and lines up quite nicely with that. I think $200 is a good price for the PlayStation Vita, and hopefully the software lineup actually catches up there. Now, the biggest news, I think, honestly, is the PS Vita TV. This is a very, very strange announcement, and it's strange in a lot of very cool ways. So what this is it is a physical device, yeah? Just like an Apple TV. It's a little box. It's going to be a very small box. They're talking about 10 centimeters by 6, I believe, so it's absolutely tiny. It plays PS Vita physical games. And one would assume it'll play digital ones as well. So you take the cart, you slide it into this thing, and you just play it. A standard HDMI port, it's like a mini console. In fact, that's kind of exactly what it is. They're also looking to service video via it, so this is directly competing with Apple in the take over your living room space. Also, to some degree, actually competing with Microsoft and the Xbox One that kind of wants to do the same thing. It allows access to the PlayStation Store and all services, and it can also function as a PS4 extender. That means you can play your PlayStation 4 in a different room than you actually have the console in on a different TV by using the PlayStation Vita TV. That means the PS Vita TV hardware is acting as a receiver for essentially remote play, but it's doing so in a way that's not downscaling everything one would assume, otherwise it would be a little bit silly. They are shooting for a $100 price point for this, which is a direct shot, as far as I'm concerned, at Apple TV, which costs exactly the same. Also a shot at the Ouya, I might add. Like, God, this... And if the Ouya wasn't screwed enough as it is, this is the same price, plays PlayStation Vita, PSP, and of course PS1 games, and has access to the PlayStation Store and PS Mobile stuff, and acts as an extender for your PS4. This is really, really cool, honestly. It's also really odd. You're taking what is a portable console and you're saying, yes, this can actually just be a little home console that sits around. You're taking PlayStation Vita hardware and you are turning it into a static box that costs less. One assumes by taking away the battery, taking away the controls, and of course taking away the screen. So you could cut it down to that kind of price. The reason this is exciting is actually a similar reason why the Ouya and other consoles are kind of exciting. It's that it gives more access to the PlayStation Vita library to people that don't own the more expensive hardware. This means there are more installed users. This also means that as a result, there will hopefully be more and better games developed for the system, because it is a catch-22, is it not? This system is not selling because there are no good games. There are no good games because nobody owns this system, so it's not worth developing for it. You see what I'm talking about there? Makes a reasonable degree of sense. This is a really cool idea. It's an odd one, don't get me wrong, it is kind of strange, but $100 for a Vita? I mean, this is the cheapest way to play Persona 4 Golden. Yeah? They should have just called it the Persona 4 Golden TV. That would have been perfect. You could even brand it. You could have a Persona 4 Golden version of it. Think about it. It's genius. It cannot fail. You need to hire me immediately. It looks like a really cool piece of kit, honestly. The only problem I've got with it is really that it's addressing a problem that the Vita currently has in a way that's not exactly cool for those of us that already own the damn things. And that's that we did want a way of playing our PlayStation Vita games on a TV at times, but we wanted to be able to do it from the Vita. Like, say, an HDMI out, for instance, which I know exists on dev kits, by the way, because I've actually played PlayStation Vitas with that. There are also modified versions of the PlayStation Vita you can get from the grey market that will allow you to output that video. But we really wanted a way of doing that. And this is kind of a way of doing that, but not the way that we wanted. We didn't really want to pay another $100 for the privilege. So, for those of us, I think, that already own Vitas, it's a little bit of a head-scratcher. I can certainly see it being useful in the kind of PlayStation ecosystem as an extender, as they very accurately point out. This will actually be legitimately useful for me, because what I'll most likely do is I'll have my PS4 downstairs plugged into my better TV with the surround sound, and then I can have my little whatever it is upstairs, and then I can sort it out that way. That seems a reasonable way of doing things. I don't have a problem with that. That seems genuinely useful, especially considering the idea that you're probably going to be sharing one console between the family or roommates, and you'll be able to use a PS Vita TV as kind of a portable way to swap that between rooms, which I think is kind of cool. It's a nice piece of kit. It sounds really, really good to me, so there you go. And of course, the final thing is the announcement of the launch date. A little bit strange for Japan, of course, to be getting this later. This, I think, would be the first time ever on Sony's side that this has happened. It's not the worst thing ever. By the time that this thing comes out, we could have stuff like Infamous or other launch window games actually ready to play. Getting Knack for free is pretty good. And of course, if there are any initial early adopter problems, they will hopefully be ironed out by the time that actually happens. So, not too shabby. That's a lot of really interesting announcements coming out from Sony, so we'll see how that turns out. DICE has announced the recommended specs for Battlefield 4 PC version via the Battlefield Twitter. The minimum specs ask for Windows Vista as a minimum, so if you're still using XP, then I'm afraid you are out of luck. Processor requirements, the Athlon X2 2.8 GHz or Intel Core 2 Duo 2.4 GHz, minimum of 4 gigs of RAM, and either a Radeon 3870 or a GeForce 8800 GT with 512 megabytes of VRAM. It will also be a 30 gigabyte install regardless. The recommended specs are a little bit more interesting because it recommends Windows 8 64-bit. The reason for that being that there are some DirectX 11.2 effects that are exclusive to Windows 8. As to how important they will be remains to be seen. Processors, they are recommending either an Intel quad-core or an AMD 6-core CPU. This doesn't necessarily mean that the game will be properly threaded to use all 6 cores. I'll be interested if it does, and very happy, considering I actually use an Intel hexa-core. They recommend 8 gigs of RAM, as well as a Radeon 7870 or GeForce 660 with 3 gigs of VRAM available with the same install requirements as you might imagine. Now let's compare that to the requirements of Battlefield 3. It's not actually a massive jump, I've got to say. The recommended requirements for that obviously weren't Windows 8, because that would have been a little bit weird. They're talking about, once again, a quad-core CPU. This game seems like it's requiring a lot more RAM. It's looking at 8 gigs rather than 4. Admittedly, that could be something to do with Windows 8, I don't know. Graphics card-wise, Battlefield 3 recommended a DirectX 11 graphics card with 1 gig of VRAM, not 3, which is interesting. They were looking at like a 560 for a GeForce card, or a Radeon 6950. Interesting. So, I mean, that's a decent-ish jump, but not a huge one. A 560 to a 660 is not that big a difference. What really shocks me, actually, is the difference in VRAM recommendations. 3 gig versus 1 gig. That's actually kind of huge. What's that extra video RAM really needed for? I have to wonder. Usually, you would get a card with more video RAM if you were looking to display higher resolutions, or you wanted higher quality textures, for instance. More video RAM does not necessarily mean you're going to get a faster game. It depends on a number of different factors. So that large jump there is a little bit curious, and I hope that's a good thing. I certainly do, because texture quality is something that's not really addressed all that much in modern games as much as I would like it to be. A lot of people said, oh, look at how great Crysis 3 looks, for instance, or even Crysis 2. And then you look at the textures on stuff, you're like, ugh, we've not really advanced, have we, in that respect? We've advanced in terms of the effects that we can display on a screen, but not necessarily in just standing and looking at something. Yeah, just looking and saying, oh, that looks great. And then you get close to it, and it's like, that looks horrendous. That really, really looks bad indeed. So, we'll see. That's the really big difference between the two there, and I wonder if that's indicative of anything. There's, of course, a 2-year gap between the release of Battlefield 3 and Battlefield 4, so it's not like they haven't had time to work on it. But Battlefield 3 was already a pretty damn good-looking game as it stands, and I have played Battlefield 4 at PAX. I did play it on PCs, and I've got to say I was not blown away by the actual graphical fidelity of it. What I was impressed by was the scale, the size of the levels. They seem to be bigger. There seem to be more options. There seem to be more areas you can just go, as opposed to the Battlefield 3 levels, which are a little bit more simplistic. I wonder how much of that is involved in the system specs, if any, really. I have to imagine if you're going to load an entire level into the memory, then you're going to need a lot more RAM. Does the video RAM come into play there? I mean, you'd think so, because you'd be caching graphical assets. I don't know. Maybe that's it, but we'll see. It's really hard to judge it off an unoptimized alpha version being played on a show floor, so who knows. And finally, let's have a look at what's going to be coming out this week for you to buy. If you haven't bought it already, buy Brothers: A Tale of Two Sons. If you have bought it already, okay, fine. We'll have a look at the rest of it. Big release this week for PC is, of course, Amnesia: A Machine for Pigs. That is coming out on PC, Linux, and Mac on September the 10th. I do have code for this. I have not got around to playing it. I'll maybe eventually get around to playing it. We'll see. I don't know. I never really assessed the original Amnesia outside of the Halloween Scare-a-thon, and frankly, I may have been responsible for starting the Amnesia Let's Play trend, because that stuff came out before even any of the PewDiePie stuff did, so maybe I've been put off that game for life now, but we'll see. It generally seems to be getting positive reviews across the board. There are, of course, other people that are covering it, and many others that are ruining it by Let's Playing it. Puppeteer coming to the PlayStation 3, that being this week as well, September the 10th. That is, for the most part, also getting very positive reviews. It is a straight-up platformer with a very interesting tone indeed. That was something that was mentioned at the recent conventions, but never really got a huge amount of attention. If you are a PlayStation Vita gamer, Killzone Mercenary, also making its way to the system. That game is also doing very well. This is a good release week, honestly, when it comes to these platforms. Killzone Mercenary is generally getting a very positive reception from people up to this point, which is fantastic, because Resistance Burning Skies most assuredly didn't. So it is good to actually see a good first-person shooter come to PlayStation Vita without compromising too much. PlayStation 3 is also going to be getting the remix version of Kingdom Hearts HD 1.5. So just in case you hadn't bought that game enough. NHL 14 coming out on 360, PlayStation 3, that being also a September the 10th release in the United States. Elder Scrolls Anthology for PC. That's all the Elder Scrolls games, cause you've got enough time to play those, right? No, you really don't. Comes with pretty much all of the expansions for everything, as well as 5 physical maps for a variety of areas within that. I don't believe they're made of cloth, though, so I'm fairly sure they're invalid. Sanctum 2 for PlayStation 3, coming out, the first-person tower defense game, as well as Dragon Fantasy Book 2, PlayStation 3, PlayStation Vita. This is coming to PC. I had that confirmed by the developer, so we'll wait and see where that goes. And beware, Carnivores Dinosaur Hunter HD, coming to PlayStation 3. Yes, it is a remake of the old Carnivores PC game. Why? Why? There is no good reason for that whatsoever, but apparently it happened. Also, if you want to be absolutely dicked over, don't worry, there are 2 games to allow you to do that. They're both coming out on September the 13th. That's Legend of Dungeon for PC, Linux, and Mac, and Volgar the Viking for PC. Volgar the Viking I played at PAX. I will be able to show you footage around the time it comes out. It is essentially the modern-day reincarnation of Ghosts and Goblins, and it is a complete and utter dick. God, it is a tricky game indeed. It is utterly unforgiving, so there you go. Pretty good release list, all things considered, for folks this week, so please, by all means, do enjoy the calm before the storm, as next week we will be getting Grand Theft Auto 5. Yes, which is not coming out on platforms we actually care about, so there. Alright, folks, that's me done for the day. Thank you very much for watching the content patch. Before I go, I'd like to give you the OC Remix track of the day. I'd also like to wish my little brother a very happy birthday. So, which OC Remix track shall we take? Well, as it turns out, there was a recent release called Be Aggressive, which is a tribute to Gunstar Heroes, a recent album that came out on OC Remix, all of course for free. One of my favorite tracks from that album has got to be Pursued by the Subordinate of Ignorant Sin, which is quite the title, and a remix of the Stage 5 boss. This is remixed by Mikeaudio, and it's a nice little mix of styles, quite frankly. A little bit of interesting synth stuff, some kind of calm, chill-out stuff towards the start, and then some rock later on. I like it a lot. You can download the whole album for free in the description below this video, and I will see you next time.